Hi, everyone. Welcome to Happy Hour with the candidates for position 2. Let's get after this. Thanks for being here. And especially thanks to those of you who generously contributed. We really appreciate the support of our operations. This is our second candidates forum. The last one, we had 8 candidates for all the positions open. And tonight we have 2 of our winners, Dan Ryan and Loretta Smith, vying for Nick Fish's former seat. This is going to be a little different than the last forum. We're going to be looser, but we're still going to be really brisk. We received about 50 questions, and I've tried to synthesize those into about 20. Feel free to use chat, but we'll most likely kind of stick with the questions we developed. And then plus we're throwing in some fun stuff to see how these 2 improvise. The first thing we'd like to do is to take a measure of where everybody is right now. So if you were voting today, who would you lean toward? Okay, it's a live race. Okay, we're good. We'll see where we're at after this. So last time when we started things, we asked the candidates to introduce themselves by telling us what park they would want to be and why. And I believe Dan chose Cathedral and Loretta chose Unthanked Park. And so today we thought we'd start with something a little more abstract. If you could be a feature in a park, like a fountain or a swing or something like that, what would you want to be? And you have 90 seconds, each of you. Why don't we start with Loretta?
Man, that's a great question. I am muted by the host. Am I live now? That's a good question, Randy. If I was something in the park, I'd probably want to be, right now, I probably want to be a tree so that I could give shade to folks in this summertime and I could hear conversations of people who are sitting under their tree on a hot summer day like today. But for me, the park, it represents so much freedom. It represents an opportunity to have great health, to be outside, in particular in this COVID-19 era. I think that being able to be outside is a great thing to be at this point. I don't know what other folks are thinking about as trees, but trees are so beautiful and green at this time of year. So I think that that's what I would want to be.
Excellent. Dan? Lower left corner.
Got it. Okay. First of all, thank you, Randy, for hosting this and for the Parks Foundation. It's wonderful to be on this. I had an experience when I was in the 80s. I lived back east in New Jersey and then in New York City. And I'd always say to people when I was homesick, I missed mountains, trees, and nephews and nieces. So my answer is also a tree. And the reason why it's a tree for me is that what I love about when I look at trees, especially in the winter, is I notice how when the winds blow really hard, they don't fall down. And I think that as I have seasoned in life, as I've evolved in life, my roots just keep getting deeper and deeper. And I think as I go into this leadership service that I've been doing for years, but now actualizing it on city council, there's going to be a lot of headwinds. I'm a system change buster. I'm a status quo buster. I like to do reform work. And so there's always going to be some strong winds coming at me. And so I'm really grateful that in my life, I just continue to nurture myself so that my roots keep going deeper and my heart and my head keep connecting with one another. And I can be clear with my values and my character can remain strong and not get knocked over when the headwinds come at me. So a tree.
Thanks, Dan. So what role do parks play and what role should Portland Parks and Recreation as a bureau play in addressing systemic racism? And Dan, why don't you take the lead on this one?
Okay, great. The Parks and Rec, I think, is, well, first of all, I just need to say that my earliest memories are age 4. And the first time I was able to connect with people of color was in the parks. It was in Irving Park, Wilshire Park, and Grant Park. Those were the 3 parks that were within walking distance of where I live. And so I think that parks offer that today as well. I notice that when I'm running through Peninsula Park, it's where people gather. I think that we have to continue to provide programming and services that attract the communities that make up the diversity of our city. And to really include them means that we need to provide programming in languages that are appropriate for them. And I also think that we just need to continue to measure who's coming to the parks. So for me, race and racial equity is always about having the measurements, and it's always client facing and resident facing.
Great. Loretta?
Yeah, I think one of the ways that we can talk about eliminating institutional racism in the parks is by putting parks and services in neighborhoods where low income and communities of color live. And I think that what we did with the Cully Park, I partnered with Nick Fish on that, and putting that park on top of an old dump site, that was amazing and outstanding. And I think that that was a way to show that we care about you, because in that neighborhood, in that Cully neighborhood, there's a lack of sidewalks, it is a food desert, and it's a physical fitness desert. And so by putting that Cully Park in the system, it showed the community that lives there that we care about you, and that we want to make sure you have all the services that everybody else has across the city. So for me, I think that that's an opportunity that we have, is to go put some more parks where people live, live, work, and play.
Great. Okay, so one of you, you've won. And let's imagine I'm Mayor Ted Wheeler and my hands are full. There's people protesting and the feds are sending their troops in, and I'm in a live election myself, and I'm busy, and my hands are completely full. What's your best argument for why I should or should not assign you Portland Parks and Recreation before the end of the year? And why don't we start with you, Loretta?
I'm excited. I said from the beginning, if there was a bureau that I wanted, it would be the Parks Bureau, because, I remember when Charles Jordan was representing the parks as a city councilman and as someone who was the director of parks, that he was seen as a statesman. He was seen as someone who was accessible to people, and really, really engaging in the community and bringing the community to the park system. So I would want to be in the same vein as Charles Jordan, because that was an amazing, inspiring story that he had. And I think that going into this next century, that we need to be able to pull in more resources, and we're going to have someone who's dynamic and who can actually speak truth to power.
Awesome. Dan?
Yeah, well, Ted, here's the thing. I learned how to swim at the Grant Pool. I did my first art project at Wilshire Park, those little popsicle sticks. I remember that distinctly when I was 4. And so they're just deep in my bones. And then every week I end up either in Peninsula Park or Arbor Lodge. So I'm a fanatic. I also think I don't think there's been too many candidates that have run for city council that have the type of experience I have in raising money in the private sector. And I really believe that's an important skill set as the person that oversees this bureau. And so I would be really ready to hit the ground running on day one to be your Parks Bureau director and on city council. And my most important skill as an executive is that I can really know how to nurture and mentor talent. And I think we have a really talented director in Nadine Long. And I would want to make sure that 95% or 98% of the management is her, and I'll stay right in the elevation that you need me in.
Very good. So will you actively campaign for the $48 million levy that is, if council chooses to refer it to the ballot in November, next Thursday? Dan, why don't you start?
Sure. At this moment in time, I think we need to have a really honest conversation about the economic deprivation that we're experiencing with COVID-19. I think it's disingenuous for us to not look at many of those forecast models that are predicting some devastation in magnitudes that we haven't experienced in our lifetime. It's kind of like you take the Great Depression and you combine it with what happened with the flu, the Spanish flu in 1919, and it's quite alarming. So what I want to say is I want to make sure that the city knows that at this moment in time, in the next couple of years, that parks are essential services. We need the parks for people to be in a survival mode, for food and shelter, for food delivery systems. And I can't wait to reimagine what that post-COVID-19 parks levy and bond looks like. And I think that anything written pre-COVID needs to be re-examined because we got to fasten up and accept the reality of this crisis.
Great. Loretta?
So that I'm clear on the question, could you repeat it again?
Yeah, sure. Next week, City Council is going to consider referring a $48 million parks levy, a 5-year $48 million parks levy to the November ballot. If they should pass that, will you actively campaign for it? And if so, why? If not, why not?
If they pass that, I will actively campaign for it. My 2 grandkids who are 6 and 2 would have no understanding about me not supporting parks. I think our park system, it's a community treasure, and that means we need to have our entire community engaged in maintaining the parks. Private citizens enjoy the amenities and the improved neighborhood quality that parks provide. And I think the business community benefits from the tourism our park system generates in improved neighborhood quality that often include businesses. So we need to have both business groups come in bigger than what they came in before and in the future. And I believe that we should be cultivating investments in parks similar to those investments that private citizens and businesses make into the arts community. And I just want to say proudly that I would stand tall for the parks.
Great. So if that levy passes, suddenly there will be $48 million a year to spend on operations. As Parks Commissioner, what would be your 3 top priorities? And why don't we start with you, Loretta?
The first top priority, I need to go through the budget, but the first top priority is that we wouldn't be laying off very critical staff that we have laid off in the last 5 years. I think that when we're trying to balance the budget, and since Parks is in the general fund, that we're always the one that's taking the brunt of less funds in the general fund. And so I would try to make sure that everybody is made whole so that we can provide a service to the community with our full strength of people and people who want to actually be in the parks and serve our community.
Great. Dan?
Oh, sorry. I started talking, it was muted. In the COVID reality that I'm talking about, I first and foremost that keep parks open because they are essential. And in fact, they're going to be such an important part of our emergency delivery system for food and such. I really want to make sure that we utilize the community centers for shelter and also for a hygiene center for those that need them during COVID. And I want to make sure that we definitely have the employees monitoring the parks for safety and for just allowing Portlanders to connect, especially those that need fresh air, that are not privileged like I am, that I have a backyard. So many people don't, and we want them to have access to the parks for fresh air during that time. I really think that third is that we need to really lean into partnerships with the arts. Our performing artists right now don't have anywhere to perform because of the restrictions. And so I would like to see more expansion of performing arts in the parks during this time, because we need joy and we need to keep Portland together.
Hey, thanks. So it's a crowded ballot. We're seeing lots of controversies already emerging, particularly over Metro's measure. There's a lot of money things on the ballot. levy could possibly fail. If it does, it would seem that most of the fat has already been cut out of PPR. So what muscle and bone from Portland Parks' operations would you saw away to solve the budget crisis? And why don't we start with you, Dan?
Sorry about that. Well, first of all, I think it's an opportunity. I do with every crisis. I think that the parks in particular is much like the arts is often seen as fluff, and it's not, it's essential. And I think that every bureau will be going through some dramatic cuts, and it's a chance to restructure and reform city government. The $5.6 billion organization called the City of Portland really hasn't been running that well for about a decade. So it's an opportunity to really reset and making sure that parks is an essential service and a part of the Portland that we want it to be. It's definitely one of our main #1 attractions. And as we continue to promote Portland, which I'm a great promoter, we're gonna need the parks as we build forward out of COVID-19. And so I look forward to ensuring that parks stay strong. And I also think it's a golden opportunity for us to reimagine how the parks will play a role in the big one, the big earthquake. So we need to make sure that we see the parks as an essential community gathering center to prepare for these emergencies. I think COVID-19 is giving us an opportunity to do some test runs on that right now.
Okay, Loretta?
The parks for me, I used to go to parks as a young person every summer, and I look forward to eating lunch in the parks and playing games with the rec folks there. But I think that now, as I have dropped a police reform package that would take $50 million away from the police, I think this is how we have an opportunity to reimagine public safety by using some of those $50 million that I was suggesting to be cut from their budget. And we could put it into places like parks so that you can maintain at least the core services that you have right now. Because it doesn't make sense to me for us to have a police force taking up almost 1/3 of that budget. I think we need to figure out how we maintain services across the board for every bureau, but that's where I would start first to take money from.
Great, yeah. Dan, I'm gonna give you one more chance to say where you cut, because you really didn't.
What's that?
I'd like to give you one more chance to say where you would cut, because you really didn't suggest any cuts.
Well, I think that we've already done some cutting. I think that we need to focus on the essential services that the parks provide. So I don't think the parks will be cut as much as many of the other bureaus, because I think that parks has been lean and has been cut more than most. I think that also parks is going to be necessary while we're in this crisis, because we're going to need places where people can actually get fresh air, can have some exercise, can do some movement, can experience some joy, again, having the arts in the parks and having the connection with the schools. There's already a food delivery system in the summer for our kids and families that have food insecurity. So I actually think that we're going to raise the level of the parks' purpose in our city during this crisis. And I look forward to making sure that it's a part of that solution. It's a part of that community safety system we're reimagining. And okay. So it becomes a part of that.
Okay. So there's about $500 million in backlog of capital maintenance needs. And the public polling that was done on the levy also showed support for a bond, but not a bond and a levy together. Do you support a bond, and will you fight to get one on the ballot, or do you think there's other ways to address the problem without raising people's taxes?
I think that we need to reimagine a post-COVID bond that does look at the essential services and also really gets to the bottom of how important it's going to be in the climate crisis, when we also have the big one that the parks are a safe place for people to have refuge and survive after that earthquake. And so I actually think that as we get to reimagine what that bond looks like, that we need to go beyond just the traditional bond that might be in pictures today. I just think that we have such an opportunity with this crisis that we're in to reconsider, to reimagine what we're going to do with the city of Portland and its services. And I think that I want to lean into that creative opportunity when we're in this crisis.
Great. Loretta?
you know, us maintaining and growing the parks funding. One of the first places we need to look is at the city's debt portfolio to figure out what projects will be falling off the debt service portfolio and the opportunities that we can garner from that funding being freed up. In that same vein, I think we should look at the city's debt policy and revisit that as well. Even if only for short periods of time, the self-imposed restrictions on how much property tax secured debt can be outstanding at any time. The state statutory limit on general obligation bond is 3%, with no statutory limitation on limited tax bonds. But our policy at the city limits general obligation bonds to 75%, 0.75%, and limited tax bonds to 1%. So I believe that we're underutilizing our ability to have that debt, and that would be a second place that I would go back and revisit.
So I was talking to the city's debt manager today because I kind of wanted to drill down a little bit on that because you talked about it last time, and I didn't know that much about it. And the way he portrayed it to me is that yes, you could change those self-imposed limits, but it's still ultimately a city budget issue because you're still managing the payments and the interest on those. So it's kind of like not a panacea, but you have to kind of rearrange the budget. So how would you imagine doing it?
You would have to rearrange the budget and see how much additional general fund money that you would need. And it wouldn't necessarily be just for the parks. It would be for other places as well, not just for the parks. And so we've done this at Multnomah County. When the library dropped off, we had like a $33 million, I can't remember off the top of my head, it was about $33 million that we had dropping off our debt service, and we could put additional service in. So that is one area that I know very well that we can put some additional permanent funding in when we have those projects that drop off. And we've done it before, I've done it before at the county. So I'm looking forward to seeing all the projects that are at play and to see when they actually drop off so that we can begin to say, okay, so that's gone. We don't have, say, $10 million in debt service this year, starting next year, then we can use that in the future for the Parks Bureau. And I would fight for that because everybody else and every other bureau would be fighting for those precious general funds at the same time. But you have to have someone who understands the budget and understands why it's so important to look at those things when you're trying to plan and actually do a 5-year planning for the city of Portland.
So a lot of parkies believe Portland should have an independent parks district. You know, a lot of other cities have them, Seattle or closer to home, Walton. What are the pros and cons of Portland forming a parks district? And why don't we start with Dan on this one?
Now, I've been reading up on this today, obviously, and I think that they make sense, first of all. And I do think there's a public-private partnership that does take place with this as well. But we need a long-term funding solution. And the districts definitely tend to help with that quite a bit. And, you know, when I was looking at the different ones, Minneapolis probably has one of the strongest ones in the country, but they also have a wildly different revenue stream mechanisms than Portland. So, you know, because we don't have the sales tax, that's a different revenue stream. So I think we need to imagine what that looks like because it is long-term and we need to have a long-term solution. So why we take a time out? Because everyone that I know is in quite devastating situations economically right now. And they're very generous people and they love their parks, but they're pragmatic and they're trying to figure out how to survive. So they look forward. I know they love their parks and we just need a long-term solution. So I'll be wildly excited about making sure that we figure out how to build a district.
Great. Loretta?
Repeat the question.
You know, a lot of parkies have talked about creating an independent parks district, and many cities have them. Seattle or Tualatin, or as Dan mentioned, Minneapolis has one. What are the pros and cons of Portland forming a district, and would you support it?
Well, I think in this COVID crisis, it's going to be tough for that district to pass maybe, but I do support it. I think we need it. I think we also need to be looking at other opportunities where there's a wealth of dollars I think we need to be looking at, just like I did with Cully Park, looking at the parks as a public health reason for funding. And since that had never been done before, I think we need to look more on the healthcare side, especially when we have all these federal dollars coming in, to see if we can use that funding for Portland Parks and Recs. And undoubtedly, you know, public health is number one. And it can't be, you know, understated that we need more businesses and individuals with financial means and mobility to also engage in the parks. And I'll just insist on that as well.
Great. Parks has a lot of properties, and some of them, if they were in private hands, would be considered to be underdeveloped. Certain old community centers, other facilities. Do you feel like there's a way of maybe financially leveraging some of these properties, particularly some of the aging ones, or maybe underused portions of golf courses for development and other kinds of parks facilities? Loretta, you want to start?
I'd like to see a study done on that to see what the other uses could be for some of these parks, whether it's being underutilized or not. I think we should take an opportunity to see what is the possible with some of the parks. What can we do differently from what we've done in the past? Because that's always an opportunity for us to either save money, attract additional dollars to the Parks Bureau, and being able to say, look, we are a innovation city and region. And we have so many folks here who are in the tech sector that would probably be really, really happy to do a partnership with Portland Parks. You know, I even talked about doing like a GoFundMe for the parks to see what that would look like, because I don't think we're taking advantage of all the new tools in this social media climate to be able to fund parks.
Great. Dan, thoughts about that?
Yeah, what I recall the question being was about the underutilized resources and assets we have, such as golf courses that are underutilized. I think it's a very big opportunity for us to evaluate that and to figure out how we can repurpose it and build on those assets. I would want to make sure I'm not reactionary right now with a decision, of course, but I think that those are some of our best assets. When I was on the school board, we had to look at old buildings that were not utilized for decades, being Washington High School, which we all know and then became Revolution Hall and such. And we have some assets that we need to take advantage of. And we also need to build a real strong foundation within the Parks Foundation. I know that you all want it to be larger. And so how can we connect the dots between releasing some of those assets, building upon those assets, and building up the endowment? So again, we have some long-term funding stability for the Parks Department. And that's what I'm getting at throughout this conversation, is long-term stability for the parks, which is an essential service of the city.
Okay, it's halftime. So we at the foundation have an emerging little tagline, hashtag, I mean, do it in a park, that some of the younger members of our board created, and we've been doing some events around that. And so I want to do a real fast hit, just 2-3 words each of these questions. And the first one is, what is the best picnic ingredient that you take to a park? Loretta, why don't you start?
Grass. You can't
Now,
have a picnic
kind you
without
sit
grass.
on?
Yeah. you need grass. You need a blanket to put on grass.
No, I was thinking about what you're putting in your picnic basket.
Oh, what am I putting in my picnic basket? Oh, sandwiches, 2-day-old chicken, and some really good fruit.
Awesome. Dan?
Yeah, definitely fruit, like apples, whatever's fresh.
Okay, best drink that you're going to put in that basket. Dan?
I really don't drink much. Water, yeah, bottled water.
Loretta?
My own container, of course.
I'm going to put some red pop in there for a picnic and some water.
Awesome. What's the best park for a romantic picnic? Loretta?
Washington Park for sure.
Dan?
Cathedral Park.
What's something you've done in a park that you would like to forget? Dan?
Really? I can't remember what it was.
Oh, okay.
Well,
Loretta?
yeah, I'm perplexed.
I was being chased in a park by a dog, and so I want to forget that experience.
Yeah.
So,
What's the experience that you most cherish in a park?
I really cherish having my family around and enjoying them in a park. I mean, that is a perfect setting to have family gatherings.
Dan?
Yeah, it was when a Cathedral Park first opened. It was 1980, and a bunch of us from Roosevelt High School went down on the dock, and we were so happy that there was finally an investment in St. John's like that.
Right. Okay, so we're going to do another poll. Who would you rather go on a picnic with? Dan? Loretta? I love them both. I can't choose. Thanks, but I'll BYOP. I'll bring my own politician.
Not fair, Randy.
You can't vote. Yeah.
Ah,
Oh, it's closer.
I can't see it.
Oh, sorry. I'll read it off to you. Dan, 36%. Loretta, 26%. Dan and Loretta, 15%, and BYOP, 22%.
Wow.
All right. Thanks for participating in that. We'll get back to our
Yes.
serious questions now. Put the screen out of my way. There we go. So, what do you most respect about your opponent? Loretta, you want to start?
Yeah. You know, I really respect the fact that Dan has worked in the community for many years, serving in a lot of different capacities that have made our city a lot better. And we have crossed each other's paths over the years, and so I really respect the work that he's done in the past. It's honorable work.
Dan?
Yeah, when I was in the primary, there were 18 of us, and I definitely knew Loretta the best out of everyone because we've been bumping into each other north and northeast Portland for a long time. I went to Roosevelt; she has Jefferson roots, so it's a part of our. We know each other, and we know that we represent marginalized communities in this part of the city and in East Portland. So yeah, I respect my opponent.
Great. Of all of the questions that we got sent, the one that sort of came up the most often was, do you support mountain biking in Forest Park? So why don't we start with Dan? What do you think about Forest Park mountain biking? And if you're against it, where do you think the mountain bikers should go?
It's very, situational. I've had experiences in Forest Park where I certainly did not enjoy a mountain bike zooming by me. So I always wondered where's that section of Forest Park that could be utilized for that. And so I actually prefer Forest Park to be for hiking and maybe for running, as long as they stay behind you and coming on your left. But I find Forest Park to be a wonderful refuge for tranquility, and we're so fortunate to have that access in a city, in an urban dwelling. And everybody that's visited me the last 25 years since I moved home, that's always becomes one of their favorite places about Portland. So I think we need a separate place for riding bikes in the park, in Forest Park.
And where would that be?
Well, I haven't had a chance to study where that would be. I want to make sure that it's also eco-friendly, and I'm quite the gardener myself. And so, maybe it should be, we repurpose one of those golf courses and we turn it into a place where people can, ride bikes. So there's probably a creative angle on this, but I would want to study it further.
Okay, Loretta?
Good question. I have not thought about this in great detail, but I do know this, that, Forest Park is a beautiful place to go out and take a hike in. So I would think that just like with the dog parks, that we could also identify an opportunity for other parks to be designated specifically for biking, whether it be, you know, mountain biking or, you know, what have you. But I think that's a good question. I would actually have to really convene some conversations with people who live in the area and who actually ride bikes to see what are some of the challenges. Because I imagine that would be such a cool place to ride a mountain bike in Forest Park.
So Portland Parks and Recreation has made a lot of progress in diversifying its workforce and particularly in its contracting. It's actually beat the city's goals. But what are two areas where you believe larger strides need to be made in terms of really thinking about the structure of PPR and how it addresses diversity, equity, and inclusion? And you want to start, Loretta?
Yeah, I think, you know, we need to start at the top. And we need to figure out how can we also, not just the parks director, but how can we have management who are folks of color, and how can we make sure that we do an equity lens on every dollar that is appropriated to the parks department. And then you look through there and look for opportunities either through staff or through programming across the board. I think that we have a lot of widespread poverty in this city. And one thing that is a great equalizer is the park system in our community. And I think that it should be accessible to everyone. And we should make sure that that happens.
Dan?
Yeah, I would start by getting the data on where we're facing in the community, what communities we're serving, and look at the percentages and make sure that they're at least equal to, but they should be more. So with equity, you know, you want to make sure that your services are facing our African American, our Indigenous, our Latinx, especially also our Filipino populations, and making sure that they're receiving services at a higher level and a higher rate. So for me, it would be making sure that it's resident facing and then looking at the impact. So now that we're serving these communities, what is it that will actually improve their lives? What is it that will make a pre-K student ready for kindergarten? What is it that will allow an elder that moved here from another country to be part of a multi-generational strategy with their fellow immigrants in being a part of the gardens in their park. So for me, it's really getting down to the ground and working from the ground up to make sure that we're having impact for the people that live in the city of Portland.
So do either of you, how would you solve the rather age-old problem of new parks and improvements to parks triggering gentrification? Do you see a path towards unraveling that? And let's start with Dan.
I think that we haven't done a very good job of studying the gentrification that has taken place over the last 20 years in whether it's Mississippi District, Alberta Arts, Woodlawn, and then applying what we can learn from that to the area east of 205 and out into Gresham. I think that parks should be a part of the neighborhoods that have the highest poverty, and definitely the areas that have the highest density and populations as well, because we want people to have access to fresh air, to exercise, and to movement. So I think that we can look at that study, but I think we have to also reject that fear and instead just go full in to make sure that we improve the services in those areas that have the greatest need for services because they don't have access to private resources that would allow them to have such recreation.
But most of those folks are renters.
Right. And so that's why it's been great that the new parks over the last decade have been, you know, east of 205, and we have to continue to nurture that and build upon that. And so renters, of course, that's why I think they should be in areas like that. That's where we have densely populated neighborhoods with renters, and they're the ones that need the most access to parks.
Well, maybe we'll circle back on this. Loretta, what do you think?
think that, you know, I'll give you an example of where that we may be missing the mark, like Columbia Pool. I think we need to be protecting those assets and not trying to remove Columbia Pool and moving people, particularly people who are low income, and saying, you know what, we're going to move a pool, you know, 2 miles down the way. We're talking about transportation issues. We're talking about equity issues. We really need to put the dollars in places like Columbia Pool, who have represented decades of opportunities for people of color to gather and to learn how to swim in that pool, and to take that away and start a new kind of tradition. For me, I think we shouldn't be doing those kinds of things. So that's why it's so important that I think we forge some really public-private partnerships so that we can maintain those places like Columbia Pool. I know we can't use money from the new bond to fix it, but it just seems like a tragedy to move all of that to another part of the city.
Okay, well, neither of you are quite addressing the question, at least, and maybe I've not made it clear enough. To give you an example, I see an enormous amount of money that's going to be invested in affordable housing, both by the city and Metro. But I don't really see a conversation happening about parks in tandem with that, because what's, you know, I mean, it's inevitable that we're seeing it in East Portland now, and it's not because of the parks, but you can't separate parks from the overall gentrification that is happening in East Portland. It's part of an overall thing. And so how do we break that you know, that connection that it just seems to be intractable, that anytime you do something to improve the city, you ultimately end up displacing the poorest residents? You want to take another swing at it, Loretta?
Yes. When you're building new buildings, there's something called GMP. That's the contract that the contractor has with whoever the business is. And you can write in certain things that would include, you know, creating a new park. So if we're going to do a new housing development, since we are the owner of that housing development as the city, we could put that in our GMP so that the developer knows that part of the money that you're bidding for will have to include putting in a new park. And that's the kind of public-private partnerships that I think that we can do. And, you know, somebody with my experience, we did a lot of different things like that with the Selwood Bridge. We put in our GMP, and we updated a lot of streets and a lot of different things in doing that Selwood Bridge that was really helpful to the community.
Dan?
You know, gentrification economy questions are always challenging because we live in a capitalistic society, and the market does drive this more than we ever. You can only do so much programming from the public perspective. So I just continue to say that we need to continue to invest in parks in those areas of town that have the highest poverty. We have parks there, but we have to improve the access, and we have to improve the services in those parks. I realize that they're renters, but the owners of those buildings will maybe see some increases due to that investment again. And so, but you know, that would be on them. And we just have to figure out when we do real affordable housing. You know, we're a city that hasn't really tackled our affordable housing crisis. We're a city that's always legs behind all the other municipalities around us with housing. And so you're starting to get in, Randy, to the homelessness and affordable housing conversation as well, which is much more than a rapid fire dialogue. But the city and the county have failed over the last 10 to 20 years with how we are doing housing. We're really behind. We need to break it down into multiple layers. And I would look forward to having a longer conversation about that, which we do in other forms. But there is a connection to this between affordable housing, which is a crisis in our community.
So Randy, you were talking about the affordable housing bond money, right? Is that what you were
Correct,
talking about?
yeah, correct.
And yeah, I think that this would be an excellent opportunity for those affordable housing projects to have them include in that master contract, putting parks in that master contract, and that can be done. you can put almost anything. You can put opportunities for minority contractors in there. There's a number of things. So we need to be creative about doing that, and particularly on those affordable housing units that you're talking about. And then if we're talking about gentrification, usually in gentrification, those neighborhoods that have become gentrified, they're usually the first to have new programs, new buildings, and new pools. So I would definitely, that would be one of the things that I could guarantee that I would be looking into, particularly for those projects, to add parks as we're building new affordable housing for people. That would be a place where I would look first.
Great, thank you. So a significant portion of Portland Parks and Recreation's lands are natural areas set aside to provide public access to nature and also to protect water quality and wildlife habitat. Given that we're a growing and diversifying city, do you see other ways in which those lands can be used, and what would they be? Dan, you want to start?
Yeah, we're definitely going to play to our strengths on this one, because we do have so many untapped resources and natural lands. I think one of the ones that's closest to me would be the Willamette Cove, that I think would be a partnership with Metro. And that has been languishing for decades now, I think it seems. I remember I went down there in the late 70s. I wasn't supposed to, but kids have always been playing down there. And that's a beautiful, beautiful land between the St. John's Bridge and University of Portland. And it's a wonderful place for everyone, kids and families, to go hiking, similar to if you cross the river, of course, go into Forest Park. So with the climate crisis continuing to mount, we just have to figure out what is it that we can do to preserve these and make it a part of our assets for our community, because we're going to really need that fresh air and the tree canopy that comes from these locations throughout the city. Yeah.
Loretta?
And a university opportunity for education. We have so many different parks in different neighborhoods, and you could teach a whole master course on our park system. So I think if we, especially if we partnered with our state universities and our private sector, that you'll find that if we partner with them and put together some programs, I think that's another opportunity for us to bring in additional resources to the Portland Parks and Rec by partnering with the K through 12 and specifically partnering with the university system.
Do you think that Portland Parks and Recreation should care for and expand the city's street tree canopy? That was actually on the public poll, looking at a bond and a levy, but also looking at the possibility of PP&R taking over street tree maintenance. Do you think that should be a priority for Portland Parks and Recreation going down the line?
I didn't see the poll, Randy. What did it say on the poll?
Well, it polled less well, but it was still, I mean, a lot of people are really interested in street trees, and as you know, Portland Parks and Recreation has a very, very, strong, some would say too strong, urban forestry, group. And I'm curious, just, we have this vast swaths of East Portland that don't have enough trees. They have fewer trees
Right.
than Los Angeles.
Right.
Do you think that should be parks a mandate of parks going in sometime in the future?
Well, I mean, it is very telling, because if you think about all the places east of 205, we're talking about folks who are the most vulnerable in our city, and we need to make sure that they have the same kinds of parks and the same access to trees that everyone else has around the city. And so those would be some of the same things that we should be fighting for, particularly as someone who is the commissioner in charge of parks, because as I'm talking about expanding bike lanes and protected bike lanes, I should also be talking about how do we make sure that we have more trees out past 205. And and I think that's just the nature of the city council. And that's why I think we need to change our form of government, because when you don't have people fighting for particular districts, you'll find that this is what happens in people who live east of 82nd. They always get less of or less than every place else.
Dan?
Absolutely. I think the Parks Department should lead this effort and continue to lead this effort. I think it's a feel-good opportunity for the city. I think that Portland has to play to its strengths. The climate crisis is real. We should have a really clear goal, a 10-year plan on how we increase our tree canopy by X%. And we should have a running dashboard on how we're doing each year. And I think it would be a really smart thing for the Parks Department to wrap the leadership around that and make it something that all Portlanders could feel good about. And we should also help our neighbors out. I think COVID-19 is reminding us that, especially as we go deeper into this crisis, this economic crisis, we're gonna have to do a neighborhood by neighborhood, block by block, systemic change in how we take care of one another and how we operate as a city. And I think that this is actually a really concrete way to build upon that. So I'm all in on this expanding the tree canopy.
Great. So Portland Parks Foundation is in business of public-private partnerships. We work very closely with Portland Parks and in the Commissioner's office. What would be a public-private partnership that you would initiate as Parks Commissioner? Dan, you want to start?
Yeah, I would. I'm excited about this one. I would start definitely with the arts. I remember when I was at the ballet, the most popular thing we did was having the dancers in the park blocks every late August and early September. And it was a chance for people that never could afford or even exposed to ballet, is maybe even more important, to witness it. And I just would remember so many kids being in awe with that. And I think during COVID-19, it's so important that we partner with our performing arts organizations. So I know we do this already, but under my leadership, we will definitely amplify that and take it deeper, because the parks is one of the places where we could actually do some performances with physical distancing. You can't, again, have people indoors. It's just not safe. And so I think it's a time to really strengthen the partnership with the arts. And of course, since my first and foremost love will always be children and youth in the schools, to continue to go deeper with that partnership, especially when we're doing this remote learning.
Great. Loretta?
We should do a huge investment in trying to partner with the arts and with our libraries and with our public health departments, particularly since we are in COVID. We need to have an opportunity from the Parks Department to enthusiastically support this kind of partnership, because what you're doing is you're making sure that there's equity. I know the Multnomah County Health Department, equity is one of their top priorities. And if you're partnering with another public agency in a way that helps you to lift up both of the agencies, that would be a great opportunity. And especially, we started a summer works program, and we did a lot of work with the public health department and around public health, using a lot of the statistics around gang violence in the city of Portland.
Anything further, Dad?
Nope, that's
okay.
it.
Getting a big blast of wind through my apartment suddenly. So let's see. So what lessons have you learned from previous parks commissioners? Are there any pitfalls that you have witnessed that you would like to avoid? And Loretta, why don't you start?
Well, one of the things that I've learned about the parks is that you have to have a leader of the parks that is very dynamic and that can bring people together from all different levels of the city and different types of organizations. You have to be able to interact. I think that because the parks is a general fund department or bureau, that it is, in order to really plan for future activities, you have to be able to bring in additional resources. And I think it's always been the issue around fundraising. Fundraising has been a key, but I think in lieu of fundraising, you have to have great partnerships. And I think that I talked about it before, I think we need to partner with the private sector and the tech industry to see how we can reimagine what those things could be going forward.
Dan?
Yeah, the last conversation I had with Commissioner Fish was when you were there. You were given the Neighborhood Builders Award from Bank of America, 200 million. You wish it was. Sorry, still very good. And so we had a moment to connect, and Commissioner Fish said the hardest part of overseeing the parks is the lack of stability and funding. And that's why it was so important for him to be there. So congratulations. And so the whole time I've been on this hour with all of you, just know how passionate I am about the parks and how committed I am to having a long-term stable funding mechanism. And I really do think that this crisis is an opportunity for Portlanders to really see parks and recreation as an essential part of the services that we offer our residents. And I look forward to being that commissioner that really builds the long-term funding model that works. And clearly I have a lot of experience on raising private funds.
Right. So what's the key difference between the two of you? What really distinguishes your candidacies? Loretta, you want to start?
Yeah, I think the fact that I worked for Senator Wyden for 20 years and ensuring that we got federal recovery dollars back in 2001, 2008, 2009. I spent nearly a decade overseeing a multi-billion-dollar budget at Multnomah County. Relationships not just with Oregon federal delegation, but with other delegations and national partners. I think that my ideas around homelessness and folks who are rent burdened and having to tackle this and put rent assistance and put other opportunities for folks who are looking for housing. I think my experience is different, and as an elected official and a single mom who raised a Black son in this community, for this particular time, I think that I am well suited to be able to be a voice, a community voice that everyone trusts.
Dan?
Yeah, I have a 35-year experience of managing, supervising teams, really healthy functioning teams that get things done. And in fact, when I started this journey of running for office, it was mostly former employees and board members that I've worked with over the years that really came at me hard to consider this. And so I come from knowing that the creativity and innovation lies out in the community. And I've actually experienced government constantly being in interference with that creativity. And so I will not be tone deaf to know how to show up and be helpful to those people out in the community that have good ideas and are bringing in the resources with people, with ideas, and with enthusiasm, and then figure out how to meet them where they are. So I'm definitely the outsider. If you're ready for somebody that's ready to bust the status quo, that's been getting leadership things done from the community and is ready to really reform the city government, then I'm definitely your pick in this election.
Great. So we'll have a closing statement by each of you, and then we'll do another poll. And I want to frame that question, final statement a little bit. If you served as Parks Commissioner for an entire 4-year term, describe what the biggest difference would be in the park system of today versus the park system that you'll shape. Dan, you want to do that one first?
Now these two questions?
No.
So this is our wrap up?
This is our wrap up, yeah.
All right. So first of all, it's a 2-year term that we're filling. So for Nick Fish, so this will be 2 years. But I'll be optimistic and think, you really want to work somewhere for 6 years to get anything done. My hope, what I will do with the Parks Department is it'll have some long-term stability. It will have a funding model that makes sense. It'll definitely be seamless in how we work with the Parks Foundation. I'll probably be more helpful to the Parks Foundation as a chief cheerleader to help raise funds than anything else. I'll make sure that we always have great management, but I trust leaders in management, and I'm not a micromanager. So I will make sure that I allow Adina and her team to handle the business there. But I will be most helpful in reimagining how we can really build the Parks Department for the long term. I'm really excited about this opportunity to finally, I think, put Portland Parks and Rec in that stable funding category.
Great. Loretta?
I think the difference you'll see between now and after I take over the parks is you'll see an excitement around equity. You'll actually be able to see where we've made partnerships in the community that are really, really meaningful. When I was responsible for education, when I worked for Senator Wyden, I was able to bring in $50 additional million for Head Start to do deferred maintenance and to make sure that they had upgrades. And I was also, as a county commissioner, I was responsible for identifying opportunities where folks who need mental health services to get them housing. I specifically have 2 projects that I had to go get 2 votes for, and that is up there at a Project Network that serves African-American women who are having problems with drug and alcohol. I've also worked with community organizations for veterans to bring in new housing. And I've created over 2,000 summer jobs for vulnerable youth through the Sun School system. So you'll find me working with older adults and young people in a big way. You'll see them being a big priority with our parks and with the other bureaus that we work with.
Great. So let's do a poll. Let's see if the needle moved for either of you. Meantime, I want to thank everyone for spending some of your evening with us. We'll do a third candidates forum with Commissioner Udaley and Mingus Maps in the coming weeks. And we will also, if you didn't get our email on Monday about the Parks Levy and how you can potentially help out or at least weigh in, please write us at office@portlandpf.org, and we're happy to send you information. And here we have the final results. There's been a little bit of movement.
Really?
We have, sorry, I didn't know where I realized you guys couldn't see the last.
Okay, we can see.
But Loretta Smith, 25%, Dan Ryan, 55%, still undecided, 20%. So Loretta, you have a little work to do with the Parkies, but we sure appreciate you being here and everybody else. So have a great evening, be safe out there, and we'll look forward to seeing you in future forums.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.